What is evidence-based training? Well, that's the title that's being appropriated by CLA and ecological dynamics, which is basically manipulating constraints to encourage freedom of movement, so ultimately skills will emerge from the environment. Now, while this type of training is often compared to traditional training, arguing that they are better than the Micah drill or teaching the correct way to do a layup, they don't have the ability to compare themselves to non-traditional training like impossible skill enhancement, which of course also uses our own form of constraints and accountability, but based on explicit details and knowledge of how players move and skills and techniques, which of course they say don't even exist. And I don't know about you, but it's not very scientific to prove that you're better than traditional training. That'd be like me saying I'm a great fighter by picking a fight with an 8-year-old. Not many trainers these days are actually traditional. So it brings me to the question again, what is evidence-based training? And what is evidence? Is evidence really something you can find in a scientific journal when it comes to basketball training? If a researcher in the 1960s or 80s had a hypothesis, does that make it evidence for today's basketball? And would that evidence be stronger than actually observing what great basketball players actually did? Would you have been able to look Kobe Bryant in the eye and say, hey, you know all that work you were doing? All those reps you put in? Yeah, well, you actually succeeded despite those things. They didn't do anything for you. Why do you ask? Because the evidence says so, Kobe Bryant. At least that's what those in this field are saying. Or is evidence something that we can actually observe in the game? Isn't the real data in the game itself? Isn't science, after all, something that can not only be tested, but also observed? And how do you better observe the game than within the game itself? You don't observe the game well by reading research articles on skill acquisition, especially as it relates to topics outside of basketball. No. The real evidence is found in the game that we love. The real data is found in the techniques that we can actually observe. And it is not coming to the conclusion that skills and techniques don't exist. So if you want science, then start here. Because we have researched this game further and deeper than any ecological dynamics researcher ever has. They say that skills don't exist due to variable movement and degeneracy, but we can say certainly that they do. See, you might not be able to write your name the exact same way every time, but if you can write it legibly, then you can still read it. It's still your name. Skills, in the same way, can be read, they can be identified, and they can be separated one from another. We have categorized and identified nearly every skill that's available in the game of basketball. We can see it, we can identify it, and we can tell you what it isn't. That doesn't mean it's always performed in the exact same way, but it does mean that it's legible. And therefore, skills and techniques can definitely be owned by each individual in their own way. And that, my friends, is more scientific than what they are calling evidence-based training. Is it evidence-based or is it false evidence? Let's discuss in the next episode of Dream Loudly. Welcome back to Dream Loudly, an I'm Possible original show sponsored by the Dream Loudly Foundation. And today, Bryce, Stanhope, and I are going to be talking about evidence-based training. There's so many disclaimers that I think I'm going to have to do in this episode, because anytime you're talking about another training approach, people, like we always talk about, think that you're hating.
Yeah.
I don't know where to start. Let's first just start off with the disclaimer of we're not tearing down evidence-based training. So I'm going to do a couple monologues. The first one, and this is more of just a statement. Evidence-based training, we can talk about the constraint-led approach, ecological dynamics. It has its place.
Absolutely.
Just like training game situations has its place and skill enhancement has its place. So my issue is not that evidence-based training is bad. What I will say is that evidence-based training, what they're talking about is evidence-based training, is being applied to things that should not be applied to. So it'd be like me saying, hey, I need you to take a protein shake because protein is good for you, which we would agree with. But then me saying also, if you take the protein, it's going to be a great form of birth control. So that to me is what the evidence-based training is doing, is it's saying, hey, this is a great form of training and it's going to make you more skilled.
You're trying to replace something with something that just doesn't
It
work.
doesn't fit. You can't take this whole science that they're trying to run with and saying this applies to everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's going to be one thing that I think we need to talk on. The first thing, though, is I think we need to talk about science. So I want to just take a second to talk about the theory of evolution. Now, I'm not making this religious. Anytime we talk about that, people think that we're talking about religion.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the science, the theory of evolution. So let me just go ahead and just quickly go over the science of mathematics. Are you ready for this, Bryce?
I'm ready.
All right. The law of probability states that once something is 10 to the 50th power probable, which is basically just a ton of zeros.
Yep.
That it's just basically impossible.
Yep.
That's the law of probability. So once something becomes 10 to the 50th power, it is impossible. It cannot happen. All right? Now, the best attempts mathematically to give the probability, the evolution, basically that life happened by chance processes, is 10 to the 1,000th power. Okay? So that means that the science of math has proved that the theory of evolution is impossible by the law of probability.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but yet, this is why I bring this up. Because people out there watching this could be like, well, I believe in evolution. They could think that I'm basically a flat earth type of person now because they're convinced that evolution is fact. But the reason why they think that is because they've been told it's science. Evolution is not science. It's a theory. In fact, I would say it's a faith-based theory. I'm not going to go into it, but they basically believe that everything that we see came from nothing. That takes a lot of faith. All right? So, but my whole point is saying the science of math has proven that the science of evolution is not science. The reason why I bring all this up is because we're talking about science. And so people are looking at evidence-based training as science because they're finding it in scientific journals. But that doesn't mean that it's science. Just like the theory of evolution, it's a theory.
Yeah.
And many people with PhDs would say that science of evolution is not science. And so this is where things get confusing, because once I slap the science tag on something, people are like, well, I can't argue with this. It's now fact because it's been labeled science.
Yeah.
So that's what I think we got to kick this off with. When people are using the term evidence-based training, I already know when I see that tag in someone's profile, that means that they are a constraint-led approach trainer or a ecological dynamics trainer, and they're using this word evidence to base their whole training on.
Yeah.
So that's my monologue. That's where we can start. So let's talk about first, I guess, where we would say is actual evidence.
Yeah. And I think when I watch a lot of the trainers that are doing CLA and they talk about evidence-based training, I think the issue is we are far enough along in the game now where, I can't even tell you when basketball started. I don't know the actual date of that. But we're far along now in basketball where we can look at what players are doing and basically copy and paste. Like, again, doesn't need to be identical, but it should be pretty close. So, like, obviously, if this was 1940s basketball, 1930s, there's still a lot of things that need to be figured out. And as we have figured out, we've been basically categorizing, for years, types of footwork, things of this sort, where, like, it's now starting to slow down a little bit because I would say probably 98%, if not more, of skills have already pretty much been developed.
The Christopher Columbus days are behind us.
Yeah, like there might be something new that pops up here and there, little speckles of, wow, this guy kind of figured out something, but we don't need players to necessarily hope that they figure something out that separates them from everybody else. We can take what players are doing and why they're successful and basically, like I said, just copy and paste it.
And what you just described is evidence.
Yeah.
So science is something that it can be tested and observed. A journal is not something that has been tested and observed in the same way. And so I think the main area where we observe basketball is basketball.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at a player, that's observational knowledge. And for some reason, observational knowledge is being tossed out as nothing. It's being labeled as what they're calling experiential knowledge. And they're basically saying you can't trust experiential knowledge. So we need to have this evidence-based approach of looking at basketball from a scientific journal perspective. So they study sports like rugby or, badminton or whatever it is, and they're taking all this research trying to say this is skill acquisition. And the problem is they're ignoring all the real evidence that we can observe. And so if you look at basketball in the 60s and 70s, players shot in a much different way.
Yeah.
It was like chucking the ball, set shots, throwing it. And the shot has evolved, for lack of better words.
And I don't know where it can evolve. The only thing we've ever joked about is somebody evolving into a legitimate righty and a lefty shooter, but the form and technique would still be the same. You would just be righty and lefty.
Yeah, the shooting form has molded now where most shots look the same that are good. And so we can talk about how there's little differences between them, which we of course will, because we understand that there are techniques and there's choices and there's options, but they're still looking very, very similar comparatively to how they were looking in the 60s and 70s.
That's why when we see somebody that doesn't even look slightly like that, we kind of immediately know it's kind of wrong. And it's going to affect the way people see you as a basketball player too. And we've seen people who have tried to, self-organize their shot, where we've seen how that's turned out.
Self-organizing is one of the key things that they're going to talk about with the constraint-led approach and ecological dynamics. And so everything is self-organizing, which basically means there's no right way to do something. A person's going to figure it out on their own. So here's what I think is really humorous about that whole thing, though, is a kid who's watched basketball is already going to have a bias because they have seen the real evidence of how people shoot. So they're going to, at least because they've seen basketball, they're going to try to shoot in those ways. And that's really the only way that these trainers who are doing it this way can even get anywhere. Because their players are going off of something. They're like, hey, I see Steph Curry shoot. I see Dame shoot. I see these people shoot. So they do have explicit knowledge. And they're trying to shoot that way. So they can say, hey, just let people shoot however they want. And they can get somewhere because the players are still knowing what basketball looks like.
They get what it looks like.
But if I take someone who's never played the game of basketball and I say, hey, I want you to shoot, they're not going to self-organize to a Steph Curry looking form or a Dame looking form. They're going to self-organize like a
Joakim Noah. No, I like Joakim Noah, by the way.
Like a 1960s or 1970s player.
Just kind of throw it up there. Give a little kid a ball who's never seen basketball. What do they try to do? They either try to stack it up here and just kind of throw it, or they just kind of granny that thing up there. But I've always talked about that. To me, the true benefit outside the genetics of your parents of being an NBA player's son is you grow up around the game. You've seen what it looks like. So you do kind of naturally, you kind of get it because you've watched the evidence of the actual game itself. So you get what it's kind of supposed to look like. Yeah, and evidence-based training to me in their field it just sounds more and more like an excuse for not knowing. And actually, I think that's the value of it. To me, if I was to go to the YMCA and help all of their youth coaches, I would take them the CLA approach, because what CLA is just basically setting up an environment, basically a fancy word for drills, and you just plug the kids into these drills. You don't have to know anything, and you're going to hope for the best. So that's where I think it actually fits. I think for coaches who don't know skill, who don't have time to know skill, then CLA is a good approach. Yeah, to me it's much closer to being a coach than it is to being a skill trainer. Like those guys that are doing that, because I've watched a couple different guys on social media now who do the CLA stuff, and that's what it feels like for the most part, is there's just not a lot of detail there. They're like, hey, there's a guy here, there's two guys here, play. There is no detail. They literally teach against detail. And so this is an area that I think, what is skill? So what I'm seeing now is they're trying to reframe what skill is. Because if skill exists, their whole system doesn't work. Their whole system is designed around there being no right way of doing anything. And so I think this is where things get a little bit iffy,
And this is, to me, where they just don't make any sense at all. Because they're basically saying there's no such thing as technique. And this is the example. And I would use the exact same example to argue against them. So this is the example that I've heard some of them use. If someone were to write down their name, they're going to write it, differently every time, even if they're trying to write it the same, because there's variable movement there. They're not going to be able to pull it all off. And so they'll say, see, you can't even write your name the same every single time. And so that's proof that there's no real technique. But you can still read it.
Yeah.
Like, it's still a identifiable name.
Yeah.
And I can tell if you write Bryce or you write Micah.
Yeah.
I can see the differences. And so to me, that's proof that it doesn't make any sense. Basketball is very identifiable. We talk about this a lot. This skill dictionary has every skill that we've observed with real evidence based on players that we're seeing of how they stop, of how they can dribble, of how their feet move. And we've done pretty good at categorizing this, where I think that we're 98%, charted territory of the game of basketball now. And that's real skill. And so I can tell by looking at a skill what footwork they accomplished. They can't do that.
Yeah.
So they look at basketball as somebody stops, and they just categorize it as a stop. And they see all the variable movements of those stops, and they say, see, there's all these different solutions. There's no right way.
Yeah.
But we're looking at 12 different rights, 14 different rights, 20 different right ways to dribble. And understanding that there is really a skill, and it can be identified. And that's really, I think, the big separating factor, is their evidence-based training says that no skill exists, and so players should just self-organize and figure it out.
I still think the biggest problem when you start talking about self-organizing and what they're doing is, like, everything is still going to fall so much down on who's natural and talented.
Of course.
Because, like, some people in those situations, like we've seen it, like, there's players that just, like, they're much better at just, like, figuring things out. That's not the majority of players, though. Majority of players, like, once they learn something, then they have a much, much better chance to tap in. And this is where we were talking about it either, where it's like there is a place for this. Like, we watch those videos. I mean, they're over social media quite a bit of, Kyrie playing 5-on-5 with a bunch of high schoolers and college kids with, the sticks trying to block him. We're like, it's not difficult for him. They might be able to get him once in a while, but at the end of the day, it's still a kid with a stick. Like, Kyrie can do whatever he wants to NBA pros. But, like, that type of training is fine for a Kyrie. Where, like, some of the other guys you watch, and some of them are NBA players that don't have skill and ability, that, like, they don't really do much in those workouts. They just kind of do what they're typically already good at. They go into the next season, and it's still just the same thing that they've always done.
It's light sparring.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And sparring has its place. And so, but is it going to actually give you skills? Are skills going to emerge from the environment, as they would say?
Yeah.
Not really, unless you already have them.
Yeah.
And so, and we talk about this all the time. When you've experienced pros, they can score whenever they want to score.
Yes.
I think it's hilarious watching some of those videos, because when the NBA player gets mad enough, they just go and dunk on the kid with the stick.
Yeah. But, like,
it could be JaVale McGee.
That's literally my issue with it too, though, is, like, we watch them and it's just like, half the time the pro is going at 1/10 an actual speed. Like, they're not trying. Like, I remember one went into slow motion. I think it was Joe Ingles. But, like, Joe Ingles drove at, like, 2 miles per hour, did a small little Euro step, bumped a kid out of the way, and just, like, took a layup.
Laid it in easy.
Yeah, just went.
And he plays that fast anyway.
Yeah,
but
like,
it just showed how easy it was in that example, because I know exactly the clip.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, that took zero effort.
Yeah.
And that's all he had to do all along. Now, pros are good enough at finding ways to improve in that environment.
Yeah.
But they're really only maintaining what they have. This is their time to just lightly spar, get some reps, feel like they're playing the game, and there's a place for that.
there's nothing wrong with it.
But if you put a kid in that same thing, then you're just going to block their shot every single time.
Yeah.
There's going to be no real context, which is the word they use all the time, for them to actually get better. And so, what's funny to me is that, like, dribble tag, for instance, is being there's a dribble tag revival. So all the stuff.
Dribble tag is why I left basketball camps.
Yeah, because you recognized that this is only going to go so far. So there's a dribble tag revival going on right now. And what's driving me nuts is now dribble tag is being promoted as this elite training now, that you do this with your elite players because all the context is in this environment. Everyone's dribbling a basketball. There's bodies all around. And so, of course, if there's a human body present, it automatically makes you better, right? Yeah. That's the ecological dynamics approach. But now dribble tag, what I used to associate with what I did when I was in babysitting camps, is being promoted as science breakthrough academia for basketball training.
I think the worst part that I hate about when we talk about dribble tag, I don't know if that's what it was called when you were a kid, but it was called steal the bacon.
Yeah.
When I was a child. And there's no way that something is called steal the bacon is good training whatsoever.
All along, under our noses, this was the elite training that we all needed. If we just would have done... Man, I could have saved myself so much time and effort
and just playing hours of steal the bacon and dribble tag.
Man, I could just dribble tag my way to the NBA.
Oh, yeah.
I was a phenomenal ball handler. I wasted my time.
Yeah.
Because if I just would have done dribble tag, I would have got there in 2 years and I would have been ridiculous with my hand.
And don't get me wrong, it's fun. Like we had to talk about this the other day, and I've been thinking about this a lot, is training to us, the way we were training, was fun from a standpoint of the challenge, putting in the work, that stuff, versus a lot of trainers are trying to make training fun, as in kind of giggle haha.
Yeah.
It's goofy fun. It's goofy fun, where it's not serious work. You can build up a sweat, you can do something, but everything's starting to become so much about players need to have fun. It depends on what type, and I'm not going to get into this, but we've read something where it was type 1 fun, type 2 fun, type 3 fun. But I don't know how correct it was, but a lot of it's all about just this is supposed to be either fun work or it's supposed to be maybe you'll figure it out.
And like I said, it's if you're a trainer who doesn't know this stuff, if you don't have time to dig into actually understanding these skills and techniques, then know these different environments you can set up. And have fun while you do it. And you're going to get some results. And we'll go back to the natural part of it. But I want to stick around dribble tag for a second. Because, I saw one of the leaders in this whole ecological dynamics approach was doing dribble tag with high school players in front of coaches as hey, this is the way to improve ball handling.
Yeah.
And now, mind you, he doesn't believe in skills and techniques. He doesn't think they exist. So he's having these players run around trying to steal the ball from each other. And he's see, they had to solve problems. They had to react. This is going to create good ball handlers. Their body positions were horrible. They were standing upright. Every dribble, they were just changing hands. It wasn't ever looked like a drive. It never looked like the game of basketball. So it's wow, do you even know what basketball is supposed to look like? And I think that's one of the problems, is that dribble tag, because it's so outside the scope of basketball, you can move in incredibly fake ways, and you can be successful in the game. And you're looking at that player, a coach would look at that player. If you could edit out all the other players in the gym and just watch that player dribble around, they'd be wow, that player can't play basketball. But yet, they're succeeding at dribble tag. And so now a good ball handler, if I play dribble tag, I could still, because I'm already good at it, I could play dribble tag in a way that's still real.
Yeah.
I have imagination and I could play. So it's not going to harm me, but it's not going to be my best way to enhance my skills.
Your actual abilities,
point. But the fact that it's being, hyped up as something that's going to give those players real ball handling, and my goodness, if that player keeps moving like that, it's not going to work, because that's not how players move.
I just feel this is so closely to the group of people out there that fall under the just play analogy and the cream rises to the top type thing. And that's where I can't get away from that part of this, where what you said about, steal the bacon, dribble tag is spot on. I wasn't I'll downgrade myself right now. I was not a great ball handler probably until about I met you in college. I could get by. I was adequate. I don't think growing up I ever lost a game of dribble tag.
You had steal the bacon handles.
I had steal. Put that on a T-shirt. I want steal the bacon handles. But that's what it was though. I don't recall ever. I think we played that game probably up until 6th grade in middle school when our high school camp stopped and all that stuff. And I never lost those games. when I go back and I watch my high school handle ability, it was very mediocre. Like I could do things, but it was just enough to get me by versus like when I actually started training techniques, learning different sets of footwork in college, I felt like the ball was on an absolute strain because I also knew what I could do with it. Where like, that's where like I think about that process of me growing up, like, wow, like I'm probably batting 100% in my steal the bacon like percentages. But like, if you ask me how I felt about my ball handling, like average, maybe a little above average at most. But I just,
you know what you reached? You reached your natural ceiling.
yeah.
And so that's what I think this type of stuff will do. Playing games, just doing through game situations, going through small-sided activities.
That's a good way of putting it.
It's going to help you reach your natural ceiling.
Yeah, because you'll learn something.
And that's why they think they're accomplishing something, because players will get better doing almost anything up to a certain point. But it's when they reach the point, this is where they'll just say, oh, they just don't have it.
Yeah.
Because what they're seeing is that person's not natural enough to go beyond this, and they think they accomplished something. But when you actually teach something to someone that they didn't learn naturally, now you get them past their natural ceiling and to their actual human ceiling.
Yeah.
What you can actually accomplish.
That's a really good way to put it, because I mean, we have people who come in all the time and train here that like work with different trainers and different people, and like they say things like, I feel like I'm stuck. Like I feel like I'm not kind of getting better. Like I feel like I've kind of plateaued a little bit. And, you know, they spend a couple weeks here and now all of a sudden they feel like this new floodgate has opened of like, wow, I have room. I can actually get better at something.
Because we actually know how to look at the skills, because we've been able to identify them. The things that they say don't exist, a real skill. The fact that we can identify the skills that they don't have, now it's like, hey, you don't have this footwork. We give you the footwork, you've now passed your natural ceiling.
You just bumped, yeah.
And that's what they will never be able to accomplish. So I don't mind what they're doing. Like I said, it will help players reach their natural ceiling. But they will never take players beyond their natural ceiling. And they don't understand that. They're getting players better, but they're never going to get players to their best. And if they would just recognize the limitations of their training, we'd have no problems. But like I said, they're looking at their training, this new scientific breakthrough, as the replacement to all. And now you're going to have a bunch of players that just reaches their natural ceiling, which brings me back to the theory of evolution.
Yeah.
They are the theory of evolution. That's why I brought it up. They are the strongest will survive mentality. That's all their training is going to do. The strongest in the group are going to survive. The ones who aren't natural won't. And the people who, you know, we have a lot of like converts, people who started in the CLA and then convert over to skill enhancement, or at least add it because they understand this is the common complaint. My good players do fine with it. I have no fix for my bad players. So the CLA, the ecological dynamics, they'll throw them out. They'll tell you that you don't have it. You're just not a gamer, you know, and they'll weed you out that way. And they'll be like, well, that's just,
just who they are.
Yeah, that's who you are. We can actually help those people.
Yeah.
And
I think that's
evidence.
the difference. Yeah. And that's the difference right there is like, we have never been, and I mean, we've grown up through totally different facets. Like we've been a part of the AAU world. We've been a part of those players who have developed from, you know, second, third grade on up, you know, players in the NBA now that were young when they started with us and are successful there now. And like, that's something that we've always been about, like against, is when people are like, oh, that kid just doesn't have it. To me, doesn't have it, most of the time, if they don't actually have it, they're not really working for it. Like they're not working. But like we've seen a ton of kids that they have the passion, they have the work ethic, they just haven't figured out what to work on. That's where they're stuck, because they're trying to do all the stuff that the naturals are doing, and it's just not working.
And you can just set up in this environment. All right, it didn't quite work. Now set up that environment, didn't quite work. You're always shooting in the dark. You have no understanding of what they're actually missing because you've never done your homework to know what skill really is. And so now that player is just stuck in your repetitive cycle of trying to find the right environment, where you could go to an actual expert, someone who actually has done their work, and they can actually pinpoint right away, oh, well, you don't have this quality. You don't have this skill. Let me give it to you. And now, oh, I just raised my ceiling. And so that's the importance of skill enhancement. Yeah. Skill is not going anywhere. In fact, we're more confident in this approach than we ever have been because we're doing the real research. We're observing the game, The evidence comes from real players, and we're just continuing to build this up. And so it all is going to work together, but we're not going to have a better ceiling. We're going to always be able to get players to their best from a skill perspective. Then, of course, they still have to play the game. They still have to go through their game situational reps. They still got to do all of that. And there will be, some players have better feel for the game than others. All that's normal. Not everyone can be a LeBron James. Not everyone can be a Kevin Durant. Obviously, we know all that. But we can give everyone skills.
Yeah.
And that's what this evidence-based training is missing, because they're not going off of real evidence. They're going off of basically theories that are found in scientific journals.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've talked about that. Like, there really are no basketball studies out there. I can find a couple on shooting, but it's more like shooting percentage stuff, because that's a pretty easy one to mark if I'm just sitting there, spot shots, make 5 of 10, whatever. There's not a lot of, studies on footwork, ball handling, that, because it'd be a hard thing other than what we've done, and actually being able to sit there and go like, oh, like that player obtained that footwork by doing this. Where we were talking about it previously before this with Damian Lillard.
Yep.
Damian Lillard just talked about like the way you build confidence in something, and like you might already do it naturally in a game once in a while where it's like oh, he does this, but the way I build confidence in that is I take that and now I just rep it. Like, oh, this footwork works really good for me. When I drop out the left side and shoot, that's been working for me in games. But now I want to be able to tap into it whenever I want to tap into it. I'm going to rep it out. I'm going to work on my technique. I'm going to work on my touch. Like, that's what great players do. And that's why I don't understand why we've gotten away from that side of stuff of like, I don't think there's anybody who's not a Kobe Bryant fan where like these are the things Kobe talks about. He talks about looking at Jordan's footwork. He talks about looking at players' techniques. The year that he stole Dirk Nowitzki's one-footed fadeaway.
And repping it out.
And rep it out. Like, yep. It didn't magically appear. He's like, oh, that works. I'm going to go get in the gym, and I'm going to add this to my game.
But this is where it's going. Because they think they have evidence.
Yeah.
They're basing it off of evidence-based scientific journals that will tell you that all those reps aren't actually doing anything.
They mean nothing.
The thing that bothers me the most is that it's this arrogance within it.
Yeah.
That it's basically just saying, hey, Kobe, he succeeded despite all those reps. They literally will tell you that they're succeeding despite it, and they didn't really know why they were being successful.
Yeah.
But they have the answer because it's found in their evidence. Yeah. But that's really the biggest problem with it. The reason why I'm so like, we got to keep talking about this, it's anti-dream. It's anti-player. I would have no reason to put in reps because it's not going to do anything. So I had to just keep hoping that I succeed off of these strongest will survive.
And again, now I'm stuck only getting in the gym when I have probably 4 to 5 other people to get in the gym with.
Yeah, and I have to train with other people. I got to go through all this, and I can't just get my stuff done on my own. I can't Kobe rep it, do 150 crossovers right to left, and then do 150 crossovers left to right like he would. I can't go to my spot and say, I'm not going to leave this spot until I make 150 of these in a row.
Yeah.
And so, that's the type of stuff that he would do, but the evidence would tell you, based on their evidence, that doesn't work. And so, no, we need to understand that reps are still part of this because reps build consistency. And we're going to talk about that in an upcoming episode where we talk about reps in more detail.
Yeah.
Because that's just another bigger topic. But I kind of want to end this one on this. This is my challenge to anyone out there I just need to know from the constraint-led approach, the ecological dynamics approach, because I keep seeing the same trend. Someone's talking about it and they say, I never really played basketball, but I played this sport. I played soccer, but now I'm teaching ecological dynamics. I have yet to find many who actually played the game at a high level who follow this approach. And so I'm just curious, if you're someone out there that were in the constraint-led approach or ecological dynamics, will you send us your resume of your playing resume? I just need to know, are there people who actually were successful playing the game that are teaching this, or is this really just a theory that you're developing in the science world? Because that's the trend.
Yeah.
I just don't I see trainers who hoop, who are playing pickup with their players or going to men's leagues, or it's like, hey man, if you can't hoop, you can't train in this world. But none of them have basketball resumes.
And that's not to put anyone down, because we joke about this all the time. I think you're in a different category, and a couple other trainers that I would qualify as people who can really play. But like, was some people qualify, like you said, that play the game with random people, versus if you stepped onto the court with the top 1% of like NBA players?
Right.
That's what we mean by like, did you play high division one level? Did you play NBA level? Like,
even if you played any level of college, I would like to know.
Yeah.
Or I should say, you didn't sit the bench. Like, you actually played.
Yeah.
You had results. Like, I just want to know who those people are, because I just don't think most of them did.
No.
And we talk about it all the time. You don't have to be a great demonstrator or a player to be a trainer.
No.
However, I think the people who haven't played are getting stuck in this kind of twisted mindset because they never went through how to improve their skills. Mm-hmm. They never had to build any of that, and they never did it successfully. Most of the time, they actually are people who say, I didn't succeed trying this, so now I'm doing this because I didn't succeed your way.
Yeah.
But still, they weren't players. So I just need to know. So let's go ahead and wrap that up here. If you're watching this and you're saying, I do CLA training and I'm in the constraint-led approach, I'm ecological dynamics, and I have a killer basketball playing career, please send it to us. I just got to know who you are, because I haven't really found them yet. See you next time on another episode of Dream Loudly.